Well, good afternoon. My name is John Kennedy. I'm the Economic Recovery Coordinator at the Benton-Franklin Council of Governments, and would like to welcome everyone to our BFCOG Spring Small Cities meeting. And we're very pleased to have Laura Ives, who is the Economic Development Representative for Washington State for the Economic Development Administration. And she will be presenting on the EDA funding process, and there will be plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Feel free to use the chat to post comments or questions, and we'll make sure to get all the questions answered at the end of the presentation. We'll open it up now to Laura to begin her presentation.
Thanks, John, and I hope I wasn't premature in pulling up that slide, but anyway, hopefully everyone can see that. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Actually, if it's all right, I'm going to turn off my video, just coordinating note reading and everything. But hi everyone. As John mentioned, I'm Laura Ives with the EDA, the Economic Development Representative for Washington State. And today I'm going to provide an overview of what we do at EDA. I'll highlight some of our current funding opportunities, and I'll provide a few examples of projects that EDA has funded in Washington State. So as John mentioned at the end, I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have. And really my goal today is to make EDA funding feel a little more approachable, kind of breaking down for you what goes into a complete and competitive application. So there's a good amount of information. Please do ask me any questions, clarifying, or if you have a project specific question you'd like to ask. You've got excellent resources here at the Benton-Franklin COG, and I hope to be an additional resource for you when it comes to EDA funding. Oh, how do I? There we go. Okay. So a little bit about EDA. We are a small, fairly nimble agency within the U.S. Department of Commerce that provides a significant impact by helping to make it easier for businesses to start and grow in the United States. We do this by working with local economic development partners such as the Benton-Franklin COG and all of you to advance your economic development projects by providing grants for projects that are tied to your region's long-term sustainable economic development strategy. So EDA provides grants to non-federal governments, including tribes, as well as nonprofits in areas suffering from economic distress. So our focus is solely economic development. We fund projects that help with job creation and job retention. And our focus is really looking at those higher skill, higher wage, kind of permanent private sector jobs, as well as private sector investment. We have different programs available. I'm going to focus on two of them today, the Public Works and Economic Adjustment Assistance Programs, or EAA. Under EAA, or the Economic Adjustment Assistance there, you can see that we fund a wide variety of construction and non-construction projects. Under EAA, EDA has received disaster funding in recent years. So in 2018 and 2019, we received, well, and in 2018, 2019, we received disaster supplemental funding. In 2020, we received disaster funding through CARES. And in 2021, we received disaster funding through the American Rescue Plan Act. So you can also see here that we fund technical assistance and our Build to Scale program and revolving funds, all under revolving loan funds, all under economic adjustment assistance. So all this to say is this is an incredibly flexible program, and we fund a bunch of different types of projects. As I mentioned a moment ago, EDA awards grants to non-federal government entities, including tribes, as well as nonprofits, acting in cooperation with a general purpose political subdivision of a state. So that's usually a county, a city, or a town. Okay, so EDA grants usually require match. Tribes are eligible for 100% grant rates, but entities are eligible if the area meets economic distress requirements, and that rate is going to depend on the severity of distress. So our standard grant rate is 50% to qualify for this, you must be in a region where the 24-month average unemployment rate is 1% or more above the national average, or the per capita income is 80% or less than the national average. So that, again, this qualifies applicants for a 50% grant rate. As an example, a $200,000 project would be eligible for $100,000 in EDA funding. You can see I have this little chart here on the right. This is straight out of our notice of funding opportunity. Higher rates of unemployment or lower per capita amounts may qualify for a higher grant rate. You may also qualify on what we call special need and therefore be eligible for an 80% grant rate. And there are several ways to do this. A few of them are if your project is located in or will benefit an opportunity zone. We look at underemployment. And the big one right now is the COVID-19 pandemic for projects that are in communities with economic recovery and resiliency related to the impacts of the pandemic. Those are going to be eligible for 80% grant rates. So again, that $200,000 project would then be eligible for $160,000 in EDA funds. Again, this is an area that can be a little bit difficult to navigate. So if you have any questions, I'm really happy to talk more about that generally or specifically. Applicants applying for EDA funding, their projects need to align with one or more of our investment priorities, which we've got listed here. You can see that equity is really at the forefront of those initiatives. We're looking at projects that are going to benefit historically underserved communities. Projects need to meet one or more of these. They certainly do not need to meet all of them. Yeah, leave it there. Okay, looking at construction projects under our public works program, generally EDA construction grants run from about $1 million to $3 million. You can see below some of the list of the common types of projects that we fund. I always say that we care less about the type of project that we're funding and more about what the economic benefits will be. So for construction projects, we do expect significant job creation and or job retention, again, focusing on good permanent jobs. So most types of projects will also have private investment. It's important to show evidence that the projected economic impacts will actually occur, taking a project from speculative in nature to more assured. And going back, I might just highlight really quickly an example of what that might look like. If you see on there, we have an industrial park. So I'll talk through an example a little bit later, but just generally speaking, if your community was interested in, funds to fund utilities or something to create an industrial park, we'd want to see that there are committed, private sector partners that can speak to if EDA invests in this area, that this will allow them to grow their company by so many jobs, or that they would generate so much private sector investment as a result of it. So just as an example. So again, documenting job creation and private investment, we can do this through our beneficiary form. It's great to see letters from businesses supporting projects. Other ways, if you've submitted an EDA grant before, if you have comparable projects, but really that first item, those beneficiaries are really what we're looking for. All right, switching gears to non-construction projects, these grants generally run from about $50,000 to $300,000, sometimes more, especially if we are seeing a revolving loan fund or an equipment purchase project. Again, you can see some of the projects here. Studies or plans for broadband systems, manufacturing other cluster strategies, entrepreneurial training. So these non-construction projects can either be implementation projects on their own, or they can kind of help set the stage for a future implementation project. All right, so taking a look at what successful applications have in common. First of all, we want to see that you are an eligible applicant and that you meet the economic distress criteria for the grant rate that you are requesting. Where match is going to be required, we want to see that you have those matching funds in place, that they are available, that they are committed to this project, and that they're not encumbered in such a way that would preclude them from being used for the EDA project. We want to see that the project aligns with the region's comprehensive economic development strategy, and fortunately you guys have one for your area. Likewise, we want to see that it meets one or more of the investment priorities. And then again, demonstration that it's really going to help the area's economy. For those construction projects, we want to see that hard evidence that it will result in higher paying, higher skilled jobs, and for non-construction projects that it helps set the stage to bolster the economy and help grow higher paying, higher skilled jobs. And we want to see appropriate collaboration with key partners, see that they've been involved in the project. All right, I'm going to talk about a few different examples of projects that we've seen in Washington State. This is one from Lewis County, and it was really working with two small towns, Maytown and City of Chehalis. This is a feasibility study. You can see that the total project cost was $60,000 with a 50% grant rate. So the applicant paid for $30,000 and EDA paid for $30,000. But again, they were conducting a feasibility study looking at the best use of this 29 miles of rail line that they have. They wanted to see its potential for creating jobs and economic growth. And so that's an example of a non-construction project in the region. The city of Anacortes, town of about 16,000. They were just awarded earlier this year a fiber broadband expansion project. This is a $2.25 million project with an 80% grant rate. This was in response to the pandemic. And really the project is going to extend broadband backbone to additional premises within the city. So it's going to help create at least 157 new jobs and retain 120 current jobs. And for, you know, a community of that size, that's really significant. Plus an additional $240 million in private investment within the city. City of Deer Park over in Eastern Washington, a small little town of approximately 4,000 people, received funding for this project called the Cedar Road Expansion Project, about a $6 million project. Also received an 80% grant rate for it. The project included road pavement along, kind of extending the current road and adding water, sewer, lighting, this infrastructure that was going to open up additional acres of private property to be developed, and then 16 acres again as well within the municipal airport. So they're anticipating the creation of 47 jobs with 40 jobs retained. So, you know, fewer jobs than we saw with the city of Anacortes, but it's a smaller community. Those projects are still, or excuse me, those jobs are going to be really significant. And so EDA takes that into account, where rural, smaller communities may not have the same, you know, job creation numbers that we'd see in a large urban setting, but would be really significant for that community. Port of Woodland, a little bit larger. This was a $7 million for the Roseway Industrial Park. This was a 50% grant rate. You can see that we are a little bit above kind of our standard 3 million cap. We generally, construction projects under our public works program are closer to 3 million. This one was a little bit above, but this was to support the full infrastructure of the industrial park, including a prefabricated metal building. So this is going to create much needed space for light manufacturing businesses, with 126 jobs anticipated to be created and about $6.5 million leveraged in private investment. Okay, and then my last project example, and I'll stop talking and want to hear from all of you, but This is for Skamania County PUD, benefiting the town of North Bonneville in Skamania County. I mean, the entire population of the county is 12,000 people, so pretty small, but this is electrical power substation. This is one of our larger projects. It's a $9.3 million project. They received $7.4 million in EDA funding. And this was part of 2018 or 2019 disaster supplemental. So they received 80% grant rate funding to fund upgrades to their electrical power substation. This is supporting the energy needs of their industrial customers in the county. What's a little bit different about this project from the others is that it is this is helping the community to recover from the disaster. And this project is really about job retention. EDA likes to see job creation and business expansion. In this situation, it was responding to a disaster. And so these projects are really about saving those within the community and preventing, major loss to businesses in the region. So it's estimated to retain 175 jobs, but still generate, almost $2.5 million in private investment, private sector investment. If you are interested in learning more about EDA, I would first encourage you to coordinate with the COG, who is your economic development district, if you have a potential project in mind. It's also good to bring me in. I'm always happy to work with you to see if a project is a good fit for EDA. I'm definitely here to help. Please call or email with questions. And even after, if you do submit an application, even after that fact, we still work with you to address any deficiencies. We want to help you be successful and put your best foot forward, to put your application in front of decision makers. So, we work to provide the best counsel we can, but in the end, it's up to you whether or not you want to apply for EDA funding. So really appreciate your time. My contact information is here. Please feel free to reach out. And I am happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Laura. Appreciate it. This was a great presentation. Are there any questions? We open up to questions. Anybody have questions for Laura?
Hi, Laura. My name is Julie West. I'm with the City of West Richland. So I did have one question early on in the presentation. You talked about criteria for being eligible to apply for one of the grants. And so you talked about the unemployment rate. Do you have to be in that category to be able to apply for a grant application?
So you have to, right. You have to meet that distress criteria one way or another.
Okay.
So there are standard way to meet that distress criteria is through your unemployment rate, your 2-year average unemployment rate, or per capita income. If you do not meet the distress criteria in either of those categories, there are different ways to meet it under our special need category, and that can be underemployment. If your underemployment rates are above the national average, you qualify for 80%. If it is, again, a pandemic response project, you can qualify for special need. So there are a few different ways that we can usually get folks to at least that 50% grant rate.
Okay, and I'd probably work with John on that to figure out what our current status is for unemployment. I'm assuming there's online references to that we could search to see if we fall in that category.
Absolutely. If you'd like, I'm happy to take a moment to actually walk you through how we would do that. Yeah, great. Let me pull up our tool really quickly. All right, share my screen again. Okay, and I will pop this link in the chat, but this is our Stats America Distress tool. And this is an EDA funded platform, but essentially we can look at we can look at data at a county level, or we can look at it more granular down to your specific census tract. So, oops, if I can get the right, yeah, okay. So for instance, I could look at Benton and Franklin. And when I come down here, it's going to show me the 24-month average unemployment rate. It's going to compare it against the national average. And it's also going to show me the per capita income, right? So you can see right off the bat, if at a county level, you meet that distress criteria. So that's looking at it at that level. Of course, if you have a project, you want to look at that specific census tract, or look at the census tracts that really are going to benefit from a project, you can click up here. So right now we're on this county tool. And if you click on the track tool, we can zoom in. You might have to go to the drop down selection, and this might take a little bit more work, but well, and I'm going to show my ignorance here. Is Richland in Benton?
Yeah, it's in Benton.
Okay, thank you.
As you're doing this, Laura, so when we start looking at a growth area within our city limits, would we consider ourselves in Benton County as a criteria, or in actual West Richland based on these tracks? Or could we go with either?
You can go with either. Yep. So that gives you that flexibility. And you can drop down, you can find the census tract or tracts, and that'll pull that data.
Okay.
Again, that was just a random one. So this is a great tool for looking to see if you meet that distress criteria for unemployment or per capita income. You can use the American Community Surveys to look at underemployment. For the pandemic response project, for a pandemic response, you just have to make a connection there. There is or there isn't one, kind of generally. Sometimes it's just a standard public works project, but yeah, does that help answer your question, Julie?
Yes, yeah, it does. The project that comes to mind for the city of West Richland, and there may be others too, but the one that immediately comes to mind is the expansion of our wastewater treatment facility. We're in a position where we have a very large area that is coming forward for development. It's under one landship owner, and so they will be coming forward with private investment into the wastewater treatment plant in order to continue the development of their area. It has large commercial areas. I'm not quite sure if it has industrial or not, but I know it has large commercial areas. It's going to create jobs for the city, and it'll trigger expansion of the wastewater treatment plant, which is quite a large investment for the city. And so trying to find grant funding to match with the developer would be very important for our community. And so that's the one that comes to mind currently.
Okay. Yeah, we have funded wastewater treatment plants. A couple of items, like when we are looking for, and that's great, right? Because that's commercial growth and expansion. So we'd like to see that. When it comes to having those project beneficiaries come on board and sign on, we love it when a project is far enough along that you don't have just the developer that you're working with, but that you actually have end tenants. EDA has a prohibition against providing funds directly or indirectly to a for-profit business or entity. So there would have to, in order to avoid what we call that pass-through issue, we like to see that there are going to be multiple beneficiaries. So if there are multiple developers, that can generally work. But what best case is when we see that there are multiple end tenants, that they've been selected, that they've they're far enough along that they're committed, and we know where the jobs are going to be created rather than just developer estimates. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does.
Are there other questions? I also put the Stats America link in the chat, so you can click on that for easy access. And I actually have a few questions, so I might take liberty to ask those now and maybe give anybody else time to think about if other questions, if they have any. Laura, on your investment priorities slide, you talk about the list of priorities that EDA has for applications. And one of those priorities is equity, as you mentioned. Are there any suggestions you might provide on how to actually talk about equity in the applications? Obviously you want to address how it impacts historically marginalized communities, but in terms of actual thinking about this issue, what are sort of EDA's guidance about how to actually manifest that discussion, that explanation in your application?
That's a great question. I'm going to pull up one more page from our website. I'm going to pop this in the chat as well for folks. This is the link to our investment priorities. And the reason I think that is significant, and I'll just share my screen again. The reason I think that this is significant is because it provides just some additional guidance on what we need, how we define some of these priorities, and so you can see if your project aligns. When it comes to equity, there are a few different ways to meet this requirement. You can be located in, you can meet it from a geographical standpoint. So maybe the project itself is not necessarily targeting underserved communities, but it's located in an area with at least 30% minority population. So that's how you can meet it from a geography standpoint. But the focus of the project can be on targeting creating jobs within underserved populations. And again, the website has a bunch of different, we have definitions for underserved populations, Black, Latino, and Indigenous and Native American persons, Asian Americans, and Pacific Islanders, or other persons of color. So I'd encourage folks to kind of take a look at this resource and kind of familiarize yourselves with what we mean when we're talking about equity. So that being said, there are a few different ways to meet that requirement. And I think what's helpful is understanding who the underserved populations are in your communities, and then identifying what the barriers are for them, the barriers for them in having the same opportunities as other communities. Now, when we're talking about wastewater treatment, that's not a project, right, that's going to necessarily target underserved communities, but you can still kind of identify those groups, and perhaps it's in a region where you have larger Hispanic populations, or in maybe an opportunity zone. We consider that an underserved community, not by race, obviously, but just from a poverty standpoint. And then there are other projects where they really are tackling the challenges of equity in a more proactive sense. So, we have funded business incubator type projects. And again, I've had folks who have looked very specifically at the challenges that minority-owned businesses face. And so they've crafted applications looking specifically at how they can reduce those barriers that have been identified for those communities. Now, I will say, while our focus is equity, your project technically, it does not have to meet the equity investment priority, but we do want to, at least at the very, very minimum, you are required to demonstrate how the benefits of the project will be shared across all impacted communities. John, does that give folks a place to start, or their follow-up?
Yeah, absolutely, a place to start. Yeah. So another way of perhaps thinking about it is, and as you mentioned, underserved communities. So applications could also focus on socioeconomic status of groups within the jurisdiction. What about education levels?
I think potentially, I mean, I think there's some flexibility for you to make the argument. Like I said, I think it really starts with identifying who are the underserved members of your community. And then you can craft a narrative, or a project that really aims at removing those barriers for those community members to getting good, high-paying, high-skill jobs.
Okay, wonderful. Another question I have also comes from the another slide in your presentation. What do successful applications have in common? At the very last bullet, it says appropriate applicant collaboration with key partners. What might be some examples of key partners? Yeah,
absolutely. Let me stick with this business incubator example for just a moment. Actually, I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to talk about like a makerspace. I had a Lacey, Washington, within Thurston County. Actually, I think it was the Thurston EDC. They received application funding from EDA to do an equipment only grant. And the equipment was housed in a makerspace that was owned by the city. And the other key partner in this, between the EDC, the Economic Development Council, the city of Lacey, and that the third party was a local university that was doing training, utilizing that equipment, that was going to help workers get higher paying jobs. So it was going to upskill local workers and make them more qualified for the demands of businesses in the area. So, and a fourth partner, I guess, would be the for-profit entities that signed on as beneficiaries to the project. So we just want to see that you have a complete project. If you are working with Hispanic population, who are the relevant parties there that have their efforts focused on those underserved populations? How can they be coordinated with? How can they be looped in on the project? How can you have strong collaboration so that you have a holistic approach to your projects as relevant?
Do applications usually require letters of support?
They don't require them, but we really love to see them. Yeah, we really like that there's support for.
They're highly encouraged.
Highly encouraged, yeah.
Encouraged. Okay, wonderful. Are there other questions for Laura? Okay, well, great. Well, I think those are all the questions I had about the presentation, but if anyone who's watching this presentation has questions about EDA, they can contact me at the COG, and we can also arrange a virtual meeting with Laura to talk about your project. Also in the presentation, as you saw, Laura's contact information is there too. So I know she'd be happy to answer your questions. If that's it, any final questions, last call?
I'm happy to hang on. Sometimes it takes a moment for folks. Hopefully
they
at least generated some ideas or some examples.
Well, this was great. Yeah, this was absolutely really great. Good kind of one-on-one introduction to EDA funding, and this will be put on our YouTube channel, so people can access it and watch it if they wish. So Laura, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thanks everyone.